I just sound like I keep it on me.
So just hold on. I don't want to assume that we're broadcasting when we're not. So give me just a few more seconds here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are live. If anybody is listening live stream or what have you, who has either my cell phone, the vice chair's cell phone, or the ranking minority member's cell phone, or committee assistant, let us know if we are not, in fact, broadcasting. That'd be helpful. All right. So today we are going to start with House Bill 2051. This is for providing for vacancies. Okay, so I just got a text that says we're on, so that's good. All right. This provides for vacancies in the offices of State Treasurer and Insurance Commissioner by statewide district convention. We're going to go ahead and open up the hearing on House Bill 2051, and we're going to open up the proponents section, and I have Mike Puckelman, Kansas Republican Party Chairman, as providing proponent testimony. Mr. Chairman, are you on? That is an error. He should be. He wasn't sure if he was going to make it or not, but he should be joining us. He does have the link? Okay. Well, it appears that the chairman is not online, and so I guess we will just go ahead and take his testimony, his proponent testimony at this point. Let me see if he's having any problems connecting. don't hear momentarily, we will go ahead and proceed forward. Have you sent him the most recent link? Is he using an old link or anything like that? Can you resend it to him, please? Thank you. Stand by. All right, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The floor is yours on House Bill 2051.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to testify on this important legislation today. My name is Michael Kuckelman. I am chairman of the Kansas Republican Party. I testify today as a proponent of House Bill 2051. In brief summary, there are three reasons why this bill should be passed. First, it addresses voter intent more consistently than allowing one person to appoint a replacement. Second, consistency. It would be more consistent to do it as proposed in this bill. And third, it's more democratic and common sense approach. Let me tell you what I mean by this. Starting with the first one, voter intent. The voters voted for a person to occupy the office, but many of those voters do that because of the political party, because of what the person stands for, because of the agenda for which the person stands for. And therefore, voter intent would be better represented by allowing the successful party, the party that the person belonged to that was initially elected, to allow that party to pick the successor. That makes more sense and more in line with voter intent. In regard to my second point on the consistency point, this is how we fill county seats. So when they have vacancies, it's how legislative seats are handled. Both parties have a lot of experience handling filling vacancies. And to do that with these two statutory offices, the Insurance Commissioner Office and the Treasurer Office, would make it more consistent with how we handle other offices. And the last point, again, more democratic and common sense. And by that, what I mean, under the current system for these two offices, we allow one person to make a decision. If we allowed the parties to do it, you would have multiple people from multiple parts of the state participating and more representative of all of the voters across the state. So for those three reasons, it just seems common sense that we go forward and that this bill should be passed. And I would encourage you to do that. With that, I'll leave it with you unless there are questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Committee, are there questions for the proponent? Representative Miller gets the first bite at the apple.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Mr. Chair. If my study of history is correct, the last three Republican state treasurers have not fulfilled their commitment to serve a four-year term. Is that correct?
I believe that's true, yes.
And would you describe their vacancies as unexpected? Because your testimony talks about unexpected vacancies. Did they not expect to win when each of those three ran for Congress, or do you know?
Well, it could apply either way. I mean, whether it's expected or unexpected, for whatever reason the vacancy is created, from my perspective, it doesn't turn on why the vacancy was created. It doesn't really matter for the three reasons that I gave. A vacancy is a vacancy, and this approach is more consistent. It addresses voter intent, and it's more democratic, regardless of why the vacancy occurs.
You think it would be a better solution to this issue? I hesitate to call it a problem, but a better solution to the issue might be that the Republican Party do a better job of nominating candidates who will fulfill their promise to serve a four-year term?
Well, Representative Miller, I will never criticize voters for how they vote. The Republican Party, as you know, itself doesn't elect people. You weren't elected by a party. We have voters that make these election decisions, and I would be hesitant to criticize the Republican voters. Well, I shouldn't say just Republican, all statewide voters in this state for who they select for any office, including the treasurer's office. The voters are wise people, and they make the decisions that they make, and I'm not here to second guess them or criticize them.
But you would admit it's very hard for the voters to know when someone making a promise is going to keep it.
The voters are always wise people. The voters have the right to ask questions of candidates and make decisions accordingly. Again, I'm not here to criticize voter decisions. I would be hesitant to join you in criticizing decisions that have been made by voters. I just don't think that's a reasonable issue or criticism that should be levied in regard to this legislation. Again, I point to the 3 points that I've made: voter intent, consistency, and it's more democratic. As for voter intent, whatever they intended, I think we have to honor it. It's the democratic way of electing people, and we should respect that.
I appreciate that last statement. I think we should honor decisions voters make across this country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative. Thank you, Representative Miller. The chair calls on Representative Berkowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the dialogue here, and thank you, Chairman Kuckelman, for being here. I think the important thing to remember is that this committee is in the process through this whole session of refining law for process, not for party. And when we clean up something that could be less representative of the democratic process of the state in the election, for either regardless of who's in the executive office and who's in the legislature, or who's in one of these, the treasurer or the insurance commissioner, any of those are a nonpartisan issue when it comes to us setting policy. And that's why we bring about law change, not for this specific situation.
Representative, just real quick, do you have a question?
No, sir. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Do any further, Representative Dodson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. How, you can speak for the Republican Party, obviously, but on your point about having the party make a selection, can you talk about how that works? In other words, is it a caucus style, or how was that be done?
Well, on these offices, you would have statewide delegates, and again, it's more representative of the state because you have multiple people instead of just one making this decision. But also, those delegates are selected by Republicans statewide that participate in that process. So it definitely broadens who's making the decision. And it's more representative because you would have, as I said, the delegates making this decision rather than just a single person making the decision.
Thank you.
Are there further questions of the chairman? Are there any online? Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're refining the asked to be in line. If raising my hand works, let's go with that. I guess my question for Mr. Kuckelman is, are you not making a lot of presumptions about what voters intended by assuming they are electing someone of a party for that position?
Well, I don't think so, because many of the voters do vote based on party, because many of the voters care more about the agenda and the policies that will be implemented than they do the individual. With all due respect to all elected officials, many times voters don't necessarily care about the individual that is they're serving. They care about how that individual was serving. People are elected, in my view, frequently based upon what you think they will do in the office. Will they follow a certain agenda? I can tell you, as chair of the Republican Party, we put forward an agenda. We are always clear with people what we would expect Republicans to do in given situations, and it gives some clarity to the voters. And therefore, I would expect this is more in line with voter intent. But again, more importantly, or as important, it really broadens the democracy here, because you have more people making this decision rather than just a single person making the decision. And every time you do that, that's better. It's got to be
I
better.
would push back on it broadening democracy. You are limiting the democracy by limiting it to a single party rather than a statewide elected official who was elected by the entirety of the state of Kansas. I realize, we'll probably quibble over the difference of one person elected by all the voters versus a person selected by many voters, but in one party. But I would push back on that part. And I think it is true that some voters vote based on party. I just don't think we should set policy specifically to accommodate one set of voters and not the others. I guess a couple of examples I would give. I'm a Democrat elected to office. There are Republicans in my district who have met me. We've talked at their doorstep, or maybe I've answered their emails and phone calls, and so they'd support me. On the other side, I have known Democratic voters who have supported Republican candidates for statewide office or for local office. We are, in fact, disenfranchising those voters when we leave it up to a party to appoint.
Well, Representative Parker, I would disagree, because take, for example, a situation where you have the executive office is occupied by someone of one party and the vacancy in the treasurer, the secretary, or the insurance commissioner is occupied somebody of the other party. Statewide voters made a decision on policy. They wanted one party in the executive seat, and they wanted a different party in one of these other statutory offices. That should be respected. If enough voters are electing people of different parties for different seats, we should respect that. Again, it absolutely broadens it, because you have more people making the decision on the replacement than just one single person. As it currently is, you have one person that makes the decision. And in a democracy, I think we all fear that we believe there should be more representation, not less. We should include more people, not fewer people.
Well, in the spirit of honoring the intent of the voters, would you support making this legislation not go into effect until after the next gubernatorial election, honoring the voters' intent to elect someone to the governor's office with the powers that were assumed at the time of that election, which would include appointing statewide office holders in the case of vacancies?
But I don't think it would make a difference, because I think we're fixing what I perceive anyway to be a mismatch here, to be a problem. This isn't, in my view, the current system doesn't reflect what voters would want us to do. It needs to be fixed sooner rather than later. There's no real reason to hold back on that. Again, it cannot be a problem to have more people involved in the democracy in the process rather than just having one single person.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Are there further questions of the Republican Party Chairman, Mr. Kuckelman? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Say I didn't finish my term being a Republican. Would a Republican take my place?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Are there any further questions from the committee? Seeing none. Oh. Okay, Representative Neighbor. Representative, we cannot hear you. Your mic is probably muted. We still cannot hear anything. I can see your lips moving, but everybody stand by. We're still waiting. Nope, still can't hear you, Representative. All right, Representative, we still cannot hear you. We can see you, just can't hear you. Would just shake your head up and down if this is a solution that you would like to go forward with. Would you like to submit your question in writing and then have the chair of the Republican Party respond to it and give his response to the committee and then distribute that amongst the committee? No? Okay. All right. Are there any further questions from committee members at this time? Seeing none. Thank you, Chairman Kuckelman. We appreciate your time this afternoon. Are there any further proponents for House Bill 2051? Seeing none, I'm going to close the proponents section of House Bill 2051. Are there any neutrals or opponents for House Bill 2051? Seeing none, both of those sections are now closed. I will then close the hearing for House Bill 2051. We are now moving to House Bill 2054. For the purposes of this, we will have the proponent section opened, and there is one written testimony and there is one oral testimony. The chair recognizes Representative Bill Sutton as a proponent. Hold on, real quick, before we get into this. I do want to go ahead and establish some times because I do like to start on time. That was not done today because of all the technology issues, but I would like to end on time. And so I will be giving the proponents 24 minutes and the opponents 24 minutes. That'll allow for about 3-minute speeches each from everybody. And Representative Sutton, please do not use your 24 minutes. You're not a senator. So I would encourage you to get your point across. So
very good.
hold on, Representative Miller.
We have a reviser's brief.
Yes, thank you, Representative Miller. I apologize. Can the reviser please give us an overview of House Bill 2054?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman and committee?
Yes, sir.
2054 is a bill that is a mirror of a bill that was introduced last session. And the gist of the bill is in new section 1, which is states no person may deliver an advance voting ballot to a county election officer or a polling place on behalf of the voter unless the person delivering the ballot is a family member or a caregiver of the voter or is otherwise authorized by law. And any person who violates this section shall be guilty of a severity level 9 non-person felony. It also amends 3 other sections of the law to basically make them conform to this. They do provide for other sections provide that if somebody needs help in applying for or filling out their form, they can, and the person that does that has to sign basically a statement saying that they were asked to do it and they did not exert any undue influence on the person. That's the section 2 and 3. Section 4 deals with questions submitted at elections, which would be primarily constitutional amendment kinds of questions, and it provides for the same reference back to section 1. If you've got questions, I'll try and answer them.
Committee questions for the reviser on House Bill 2054. Just real quick, Mike, I do have a question for you. If somebody wants to give another person their ballot and have them take it in under current law, do they have to sign and list that person on their ballot? Not on the ballot, but the envelope, I guess.
Right. I believe that's correct, but let me find the language here.
Okay, I do have the Secretary of State's office online if you would like to punt to them.
I'll punt to them.
All right, Secretary of State's office, if you guys would like to go ahead and answer that question.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Katie Copal, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Communications and Policy. For individuals who are unable to transport their ballot, there is a section, you are correct, on the outside of the ballot, on the outside of the envelope containing the ballot, where they would fill out the information they would sign, and also the individual who's transporting their ballot would sign. Additionally, our office strongly recommends that individuals who use a third party to transport their ballot take either a photo of it using their smartphone, which most of us have, or a copy of it, just in the event that ballot does not make it back to the election office.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Committee, are there further questions of the reviser? Representative Miller.
Well, actually, my question is for the Secretary of State's office, but I can wait as long as Katie stays on. Katie, are you aware of any of the millions of ballots that have been cast? Anyone complaining that their ballot was not returned as they requested?
Mr. Chairman, I would need to verify with our elections division. I can do that and get back to you guys momentarily.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any further questions on the bill language itself to the reviser? Seeing none. All right, Representative, now we are opening it up to you. You are being timed, so feel free to go.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to testify, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair and Ranking, and all the members of the Elections Committee. I am Bill Sutton of the 43rd District. I'm testifying in support of HB 2054. Let me start out by saying, first off, that, and I'll keep this short, I'm not going to read my testimony to you because I have a feeling that most of you can read just fine. But Kansas is in a really good position, and it's due in large part to the work of the Elections Committee. A lot of the problems that we saw around the country didn't arise in Kansas because the questionable or unauditable voting machines are not entirely gone, but very much on their way. And so we really ran a great election. There are just a couple of areas that we still need to plug up in order to satisfy the needs of our voters that our elections are free, fair, and transparent in every possible way. And one of the things that we've done in the past is at a ballot location, at a voting location, we can't campaign within 150 feet. The candidate can't go in and shake hands and walk people over to the voting machine and put his arm around them and tell them how to vote. And I think we would all agree that's a good thing. The secrecy and impartiality and lack of influence on a voter while voting, I think is critical to the election process. That's at a polling location. Ballot harvesting is the collection of absentee ballots from voters by a third party who then delivers them. We don't know if that third party was with the voter as they were filling it out. We don't know if they were, if the candidate, it could be a candidate helping someone fill out their ballot. That would be a level of influence that we don't want involved in our election process. It could be a third party. It could be a paid ballot harvester. These are things that we just need to be able to affirm to our voters that in Kansas, their election is absolutely legitimate. We saw what happens when across the country, people questioned the legitimacy of their voting. We're doing a great job. We just have a little bit more to do, and I urge you to support HB 2054. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative, does the committee have any questions for the representative? Representative Miller.
Representative Sutton, thank you for promoting this discussion. Are you aware of a single case of impropriety in this area?
That would be a real difficulty to answer. Am I aware of one?
Actually, it's not hard to answer. It's because it's a yes or no question. Yes or no. Are you aware of any case where this has been a problem?
I'm not, but there's no way I would be.
Okay. And are you aware of the language on the envelope that a person transporting someone else's ballot must sign?
I am absolutely aware of that. And that begs another question, something I meant to cover just a minute ago. If we're not certain that the ballot was filled out free of influence, coercion, payment, what have you, how can we be certain that that outside envelope was filled out free of influence?
All right. Are you aware that every one of those activities you just described would amount to a felony offense? Duress.
I am absolutely aware of that.
Those are all felony offenses. You're aware of that. And you are required when you transport someone's ballot to sign an affidavit that says you have not done any of those things under penalty of felony prosecution. Are you aware of that?
I am absolutely aware of that as well.
Now, are you familiar with anyone that wants to take the chance of serving 5 to 14 months in prison for that to alter that person's vote? Because
there have been cases throughout the country.
I've never met someone who was willing to take that risk for a vote.
Okay, there have been a number of cases across the country. You can look at North Carolina, Florida, Texas.
Excuse me, pardon me for interrupting, but I'm not talking about across the country because I'm very focused on Kansas law. because that's the only thing I have anything to do with. So I'd like to keep our discussion related to Kansas law. And I asked you the question, and you answered that, and that is you're not aware of any case, which I assume meant Kansas case.
I'm not aware of a Kansas case. That is correct.
Thank you, Representative.
All right, Representative Bourgeon.
Question's been answered.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, is it currently illegal for a candidate to go to somebody's door when they know that they have a mail-in ballot waiting to be filled out?
Not at all.
Okay, and is there anything illegal about that candidate standing there while the person fills out the ballot?
No, there's not.
And is there anything illegal about him then, when the ballot's put in the envelope and it's signed, him signing the affidavit and taking it and dropping it off on behalf of that voter?
Absolutely legal.
Okay, and thanks for your patience, Mr. Chairman. My last question, is there any difference between that and what you described at the beginning, which is electioneering at a polling place? How are those two things different?
I see no difference whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, are there further questions of the representative? Looking to those online, seeing no hands. Okay. Representative, thank you so much for your proponent testimony. With that, committee, I would point you to Representative Anderson's testimony. It is written, and we will go ahead and close the proponent section of the hearing on House Bill 2054. We will now move to the opponents section. And for the first opponent, we have Rocky Nichols, Executive Director of the Disability Rights Center of Kansas.
Great, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rocky Nichols, Executive Director of the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. Under federal law, there's a designated entity in every state, like DRC Kansas, to be the officially designated protection and advocacy system. And in Kansas, we are that entity designated to protect and advocate for the rights of Kansans with disabilities, including their right to cast a ballot and their right to reasonable accommodations. We're in opposition to House Bill 2054. It places arbitrary limits, making it harder for Kansans to have their advance ballots submitted. We think it will disproportionately harm Kansans with disabilities. Why? Many Kansans with disabilities use advance ballot, either permanent or one-time advance ballot, to cast their vote. Many Kansans with disabilities don't have transportation. They also may have cognitive or other impairments that may make it difficult for them to remember to mail their ballot back in on time. What this bill would do is effectively force many of those Kansans with disabilities to not have their votes counted because they may not be able to quickly find a family member or a caregiver, which is what the bill would limit it to, available to deliver their ballot. This bill makes it much harder for those Kansans with disabilities to cast their vote. So let's say a person with disability forgets to mail back their advance ballot, which may be because of their disability, brain injury, other impairment. It's now election day or election eve. Under this bill, they'd have to either arrange transportation to take the ballot in themselves, where they may not have a license to drive, they may not have transportation, have to frantically find a family member or caregiver to deliver their ballot. And that limitation makes it unnecessarily difficult for them to vote. Again, many people with disabilities can't drive, or they have serious barriers ranging from transportation to turn in the ballots themselves. That's why many Kansans with disabilities vote advance in the first place. Many do it permanent, but some do it election by election. And people with disabilities are forced to live in poverty just to obtain the life-sustaining home and community-based service waiver services they need to survive. So let's say you're a person with quadriplegia who needs a physical disability waiver service to help you with your activities of daily living to accommodate your disability. Unless you know how to navigate the work incentives, you're generally limited to earning no more than 3 times the federal supplemental security income level, or SSI, which is currently less than $800 per month.
Seconds.
So you're basically forced to live in poverty. So this disproportionately harms people in poverty who are people with disabilities who don't have the disposable income to deal with the new headaches caused by this bill, and the new red tape and hoops this bill causes will take away the franchise from too many people with disabilities. We think it's discriminatory against people with disabilities. We strongly encourage you to not pass House Bill 2054.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Next, we have Kendall Seal, Director of Advocacy, American Civil Liberties Union of Kansas.
Thank you, Chairman Carpenter, members of the committee. My name is Kendall Seal. I'm the Director of Advocacy with the ACLU of Kansas. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that's working to preserve and strengthen the constitutional liberties and rights of all Kansans. And one of those constitutional rights at stake is present in House Bill 2054. This bill will lead to voter suppression and unnecessary litigation and expense for the state of Kansas. At the start of the session, when this committee heard from the Secretary of State, he and his team reported the election could not have gone any better from their perspective. In fact, some suggested we must be cautious with how we tinker with state election law. The Secretary of State claims he wants to give Kansas voters a good voting experience. This bill does not support that mission. In fact, it will not only fail to give people a good experience, but a bigger issue here is it doesn't recognize the reality of people's lives, their communities, and the relationships of trust they have. It also puts up very real roadblocks for voters and will result in the disenfranchisement and punishment of Kansans. First, this bill is an example of government overreach into people's lives. It erodes their civil liberties because it directs them to trust only certain categories of people to drop off their ballots at a drop box, clerk's office, or polling location. Second, this bill makes felons out of neighbors helping neighbors. For example, under this bill, a trusted friend from a house of worship or a church could not assist their neighbor with dropping off a ballot. It will criminalize volunteers from community service organizations and nonprofits helping to get out the vote. It will prevent rural Kansans without nearby family members or long-term trusted caregivers from voting. Finally, the proposed punishment does not align with an actual widespread problem. As written, this bill creates another crime to toss even more nonviolent people in prison and run up the state's expenses. This contradicts testimony this legislature's own commission just received. This bill will not result in a good use of state resources. It will disproportionately impact seniors, the disabled, people of color, and rural voters. This will not make Kansas elections better. It should not pass out of this committee as drafted. Thank you again for your consideration today.
Sir, the chair recognizes Davis Hammett, Loud Light Civic Action Group.
Hi, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for having me. I just want to make a couple quick points. I guess my biggest concern with this is really why. Why is this bill necessary? Why is it justified? I'd keep in mind that a practice that has been legal for decades in Kansas that many people are accustomed to, you're about to make it a felony. Think about that. Many people, this is just a habit of how they return their ballot. They have a friend who always helps them. They have a member of church that always helps them. And now, unbeknownst to them, you're going to pass a law that will make them felons, that will strip them of their right to vote, that could send them to jail. That should carry a lot of gravity. And I hope y'all think very carefully before passing a law like this. The other thing that we know and that we realized last year when the committee held a hearing on this bill, on a very similar bill, is that every concern we have about nefarious action, about undue influence is already illegal. Actually, what a representative during their question earlier, if a candidate hovered over you and you felt pressured to vote for them, they could actually call the district attorney because then they had undue influence on their ballot and that person could be charged. As far as enforcement goes, we also heard from the Secretary of State earlier this year that 92% of mail ballots were returned this year, which was a groundbreaking number, and we should celebrate that, not make that number drop by making it harder to return ballots. But also, you can actually go through and you can call these people. You could call the 8% of people who didn't have mail ballots returned and find out if they gave them to someone. There are enforcement and investigation methods that already exist and are very accessible to anyone. Any of y'all could actually begin that investigation. This is really just a solution in search of a problem that doesn't exist here. And so in essence, it is voter suppression in search of some kind of justification. There's no justification for this. It's very concerning. I just would hate to see y'all charge people with crimes for doing nothing but helping their neighbors. I'm happy to take questions when appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but we are saving the questions until the end, after all the opponent testimony. The chair recognizes Dr. Glenda Overstreet Vaughn, NAACP representative.
Thank you very much. To the Elections Committee Chair and members, I am representing the NAACP, not only the Topeka branch, but also the state of Kansas. As many of you may know, the NAACP is a civil rights organization that was formed back in the early 1900s. And part of the charge was to ensure and protect voting rights. And so with that, we have a number of years where we continue to fight against bills such as this that has a tendency to suppress the vote. There is no justified rationalization for why this bill is needed or why it was even written, because there's no issue that it's actually addressing. I think it has also been said earlier that has not been a problem that has been brought to the attention that this particular bill would resolve or respond to. That being said, it would adversely impact our senior citizens who are active voters. Those who want to vote are going to be extremely discouraged from, and there are senior citizens that have reached out to me very much against this particular bill because some of them don't have family members and some of them don't have caregivers. And so they rely upon their friends, they rely upon their neighbors, they rely upon their church members to be able to deliver those ballots for them. We have a process. We have a process already established for accommodating names of those consented by the voter to deliver their votes. And so with that being in place, there's no need for this particular bill. This particular bill not only impacts adversely senior citizens, it also negatively impacts our low-income citizens because it limits and it could provide no access for them to be able to timely get their information. And then it also has an impact on those people of color. And so with respect to that, I would, on behalf of the NAACP, strongly encourage this committee not to consider this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, the chair recognizes Kenya Cox, Kansas African American Affairs Commissioner. Is she still online?
Good afternoon. There we go. Good afternoon, Chairman Carpenter and members of the Election Committee. I am Kenya Cox, the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. I'm also the President and the Chairman and a member of many organizations that work hard to ensure that any eligible citizen that wants to vote, that they can. And that work may involve taking voters to the polls or picking up their ballots. The chairman of the Republican Party started off this committee meeting today talking about and made the statement that voters are wise people and that we should honor their choices. I agree that voters are wise people and we should honor their choices. And that's why I am testifying today against that bill, because we have a process already in place. I've submitted my testimony, which you have before you, and I won't go through the whole testimony. Things that mentioned that testimony, and I believe that this amendment puts unnecessary burdens on voters. The amendment creates barriers for the elderly, for voters that are in the hospital, when residents, they can't leave and family members can't visit, but where a nurse or a doctor could be the go-between to get the ballot turned in legally. The amendment creates barriers for residents in remote communities where there's a friendly neighborly practice of delivering each other's sealed, signed ballots to the county election office, and barriers for those without reliable transportation. These unnecessary restrictions disproportionately impacts the communities, poor communities, African Americans, Latinos, and indigenous voters, a demographic that is still suffering from historical corrupt disenfranchisement. I would also like to note that on the Secretary of State's website right now, it talks about the best way to ensure that your ballot is returned to local election offices is to hand deliver it or place it in a secure election drop box. I believe that our focus should be on accessible, reliable, verifiable elections, and this does not do that. We know that the way of the future is going to be mail-in advanced ballots, and our focus should be on securing our infrastructure, not obstructing legal citizens who want to participate in their constitutional right as voters. Again, I just want to say that I believe it's time for we are ready for a better story, and it can start with you all not passing this bill out of committee. Thank you for this opportunity to address you on today.
Thank you. The chair recognizes, forgive me if I butcher this, the chair recognizes Michael Popa, Executive Director of the Mainstream Coalition.
Thank you. You did not butcher it. I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify virtually today. Mainstream Coalition is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering Kansans to fully participate in the political process. We oppose HB 2054. The right to vote and have that vote counted is central to our democracy. Our nation has a long history of struggle with this issue. Luckily, in Kansas, even in the depths of a global pandemic and attacks on our election processes nationally, our elections here had no issues of fraud. Quote, Kansas did not experience any widespread systematic issues with voter fraud, intimidation, irregularities, or voting problems, a spokeswoman for the Kansas Secretary of State told the New York Times recently. With no fraud in this past election, or any elections that we know of, why would the legislature attempt to make voting more difficult for people? This bill is a solution to a problem that does not exist, but it will create the very real problem of restricting the ability of many Kansans to vote and have their vote counted. Additionally, it seems to create a very undue burden on county clerks and election officials, or all those who will be investigating and trying to enforce this proposed legislation. In the words of Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab in recent testimony, we don't need a drastic change in our election law. I urge you to please reject voter suppression, oppose HB 2054, and instead invest in efforts that would make voting accessible to all eligible Kansas voters. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, sir. The chair recognizes Dr. Terrence Holder, Missionary Baptist State Convention of Kansas. All right, let's see if they're online real quick.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the other distinguished members of the House Election Committee. thank you for the opportunity of being able to share this afternoon, and certainly to all of the others who have spoken opposition of HB 2054. I believe that this particular bill is disingenuous to the democratic process and wholly really disenfranchises many different demographics throughout the state of Kansas, particularly our seniors, disabled veterans, and any person who is dealing with a disability that would prevent them from being able to fulfill the responsibility of voting like others who have the privilege of going out to the various voting locations. And I believe to criminalize those persons who are helping people participate in this democratic process is both un-American and undemocratic. I believe it, again, puts undue pressure and strain upon our voting system, and certainly upon those who are just trying to exercise their constitutional right. If fake news was ever a reality, I believe that this whole concept of ballot harvesting and things of that nature speaks to that. And it's very dangerous for us to continue to carry the mail of the previous administration because we heard a whole lot of that, and we understand how that has incensed our country. We are in the midst of a civil war when we see an assault on our nation's capital by right-wing extremists, and we're afraid to call that out. That plays into all of these very nefarious laws that many are seeking to pass. It's unhelpful to our democratic process, and I believe that we need to be better representatives of our democracy. And so I'm in opposition of this. I represent over 20,000 constituents across the state of Kansas. An overwhelming number of them are senior citizens and those who are dealing with disabilities, and this would disenfranchise them. And so I stand in opposition to this bill.
Thank you. Thank you for all the people who have had testimony today. So I will go ahead and open it up for questions to the opponents. Committee, are there questions? Representative Miller.
I have a question for Mr. Seal, if he's still online. Kendall Seal.
Yes, Representative.
Sir, are you an attorney?
I'm an attorney, licensed attorney in the state of Missouri.
Oh, well, that's not much. But I have a legal question, and if you don't feel comfortable answering it, I would like a follow-up with whatever attorneys on your staff could. And I understand the ACLU has been the party that's been so successful in litigating some of our other questionable legislation all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. But my question is, the way this bill is drafted, if I do not have a family member or a caregiver to return my ballot versus someone who does, do we have an equal protection problem? And what is the likelihood that the ACLU would bring such a suit and again collect tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees upon being successful?
We've had some success with that, Representative Miller. I would have to take that hypothetical back to my team to provide a response.
Well, if the bill passes in its current form, it becomes a lot more than a hypothetical. It becomes an actuality. There are lots of people, my next door neighbor is one of them, who does not have a caregiver, nor does she have any living family members, and who depends on me to return her ballot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a question for Ms. Fox. She said something that really concerned me during her testimony. You know, we've heard several opponents today say, you know, there's no evidence. You know, I think one one of the witnesses said it's a solution in search of a problem. Well, I'd like to hear some evidence because Ms. Fox said that people of color in our state are already suffering, and I'm quoting, corrupt disenfranchisement. And I'd like to know if you know of any specific instances of that, because if it is happening, I would like to bring that before the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe that question was directed at me, Kenya Cox, C-O-X. And my exact words in my testimony was that historical reference to disenfranchisement. And so that speaks to the historical disenfranchisement of many of the Jim Crow type of laws that had been enacted all across this nation. So that's exactly what I was speaking on, sir.
Okay, and I apologize for mistaking your name. I
No
apologize
problem.
for that. But so you're talking about the South. If you're talking about Jim Crow, you're not talking about Kansas.
Oh yeah, I'm unfortunately, and if you read the my testimony, you'll see my at the very end. I'm a person that I love Kansas. I like to say I'm a born again Kansan. I decided to be here by choice. I love this this state. And unfortunately, even Kansas has some unfortunate history of voter intimidation of African Americans and Latino and indigenous folks. And we have a great history of being a welcoming state as well.
Thank you. I'm a import Kansan as well, and I love the state too. And I just wanted to make sure that we were talking about history. We weren't talking about the present. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Holder, could I ask you a couple of questions, please? In a perfect world, I agree with everything you said. But if I delivered ballots to my house, just my wife and I, do you think I could have an influence on her?
I would think that your wife would be independent in her own choice as to who she wanted to vote for. I don't think that just because we're married to someone that we necessarily influence their decision. My wife does not always vote the way that I vote. And so I think many times she probably is the smarter of the two in choices that she makes. But I wouldn't say that you would necessarily have an influence on her.
In a perfect world, again, Dr. Holder, I agree with you. But again, I think the aggressive person in the House can dictate what the other person does when they do it in front of each other. If she went into a voting booth and I went into a voting booth, I'd have no idea what she did. And I know no challenge, but there at the House, there would be a challenge. Did you know, Doctor, and again, in a perfect world, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. And 50 years ago, Jimmy Carter said, this will lead to trouble within our country. Jimmy Carter made that statement. Did you know that?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any further questions from committee members or the opponents? Anybody online? Representative Bourgeon.
I'm not sure this question is for the opponents, but in the new section 1, I'm not familiar with current law and how this works, but how is a family member or caregiver of the voter designated, and how is that verified?
Do any of the opponents have that answer?
I don't necessarily, not unless it was done by way of affidavit. I believe that there are measures that can be taken to ensure who is delivering those ballots, whether that is signator or what have you. But again, I don't think that we have had widespread issues with that, certainly not here in the state of Kansas. And that's been by the admission of our Secretary of State and others who participate in the the fair and free election process.
I'm more interested in the practical implication of the bill and how it works. I'm not getting into that question. So would it be up to the counties and the Secretary of State to verify that information for these ballots these ballots that are returned?
Yes, they have the responsibility of hosting the election. So I think that the responsibility should lie with those entities.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm also interested in hearing from the Secretary of State's office on whether or not this has been a widespread issue and if there are specific examples of this happening in the state. Thank you.
Are there further questions for the opponents from committee members?
I have a question for the reviser when we've exhausted these questions.
All right, seeing no more further questions for the opponents, I will be closing the opponent section. Are there, and I will point you to the written testimony from the opponents. We have various items there. I have no neutrals listed. Just for committee clarification on a few questions here. Representative Bourgeon, would you like to ask the Secretary of State's office your questions?
Well, yeah, I guess if that's the appropriate place, or the reviser.
All right, if the Secretary of State's willing to entertain the question, feel free, and remember, you know, they are here for information, so just remember that. Thank you.
This is Brian Caskey, Director of Elections for the state of Kansas, representing the Secretary of State's office. If Representative Bourgeon could repeat the question.
In new section 1 of this bill, it says that I guess I'm just wanting to know how is a family member or caregiver designated in this process, and how is it verified?
So as of this moment, there's no definition of family member or caregiver in the election statutes. If this bill passed as it is currently written, our office would consult with our legal counsel and other appropriate entities to define that. But as of today, I'm not aware of a definition within the election code of family member or caregiver. As to the second part of your question, who would verify that? The law is unclear, keeping in mind that election officials at the county level are administrators. They are not law enforcement officers or investigators. And so that would be a question that we would have to do some more research on, with the caveat, we are election administrators, not law enforcement officials.
All right, Representative Miller.
Question for Mr. Heim. Mike,
are you available?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I've never hovered over a voter while they were voting in my presence, but I've had a number of them who asked me to mark their ballot. Is that illegal?
It's not illegal if they're unable to mark the ballot themselves.
And does this legislation in front of us make it illegal?
I don't believe it does, as long as there is some disability issue there.
And would I be, if this bill passes, would I be allowed to transport that ballot after they had requested that I actually mark it for them?
Again, if you sign the forms and so on, I think you could transport it. If you're a family member or a caregiver, I think that's the tie-in.
I'm assuming hypothetical I'm giving you does not assume I'm a family member or a caregiver. I'm simply someone that they requested assistance. They asked me, in fact, I did this as recent as November 2nd. I remember it vividly because I was the one marking the ballot while about 8 or 9 family members stood outside while I did it at her request.
Well, what I would suggest is that Section 1 deals with delivery. It doesn't deal with marking and so on. So you could help mark if they had a problem, but you probably couldn't help deliver.
Very good, thank you.
I would defer to Brian Caskey if he's got a different opinion, but that's, and I agree with him. There is no definition in the election statutes dealing with family member or caregiver.
That's the way I read it, and I asked the question simply to point out the silliness of what it is we're trying to fix here. Thank you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question's for the Secretary of State's office. So I don't want to get you in trouble with your boss, but your boss was quoted by several witnesses today as saying that there was no widespread irregularities. And I just wanted to get at the nugget of what an irregularity is. If a third party or a candidate or a campaign sent 200 ballot requests of registered voters in their district, then went to all 200 of those houses, helped them fill them out, and then took the ballots in for them without intimidation, just, you know, got permission to do that, that's not an irregularity right now, is it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The context of that quote was given when we were asked about, was there, if you go back to the November 2020 elections, there were concerns about voters being intimidated at the polls, increased voter fraud. And so that was the context in which that quote was offered.
But what I just described right now is not against the law, is that correct?
Correct, correct.
So there could be no widespread irregularities, but what I just described could have occurred and probably did. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, we're going to have to wrap this up here pretty soon. Otherwise, I'm going to have to hold us a little bit past 5 because we still have House Bill 2090 to work. So with that, I'm going to call on one final representative. Please make it short. Representative Lee Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for the Secretary of State's office, and this is just for context for me. So currently, how does it work when somebody carries a ballot? Is it's sealed? Do they have to sign an affidavit currently?
So the way the law works currently, on the outside of every mailed advance envelope, there's a section where the person who provides assistance in transmitting or marking the ballot must sign an affidavit on the outside of the envelope that they are acting according to the voter's wishes. So there is an affidavit that's on the outside of the return mail advance ballot envelope currently.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. With that, we are closing the hearing for House Bill 2054. If the Secretary of State's office would be so kind as to provide a sample ballot envelope to the committee assistant so that the committee members can see what an envelope looks like, we'd appreciate that. I don't know if they can hear us. Anyway. Okay. So, okay, sounds good. Okay, so committee, we are moving on to House Bill 2090. I am opening up House Bill 2090 for discussion. This is what we debated on, or not debated, we heard on Tuesday. It is in regard to military members who also serve as elected officials, whether partisan or nonpartisan. And so I'm going to open up that for discussion. And I do know that the reviser has sent us all the language for a balloon amendment. And so I would actually like to go ahead and offer up that balloon amendment myself. And so I'm looking for a second. Okay. So we have a second, so now we're on discussion. The balloon amendment, I'll give you guys all a little while to pull that up if you have not done so already. You should have received it from Mike Heim. or actually the committee assistant, apologies. You should have received it today at 9:52 a.m. Is there discussion? Representative Miller.
Well, if no one else is going to say it, I will say it looked like what we wanted. I would move those amendments.
Okay. If there's no discussion, the amendment is being moved. All those in favor, hold on first, actually, do we have anybody online right now on WebEx who is not in the Capitol building? Any committee members? Representative Parker, yep, you're in your office unless that's a background. You're in a very small image right now. Thumbs up if you're in your office. Okay. All right. Just thumbs up, Representative Parker. I can see you on my camera, so thumbs up or thumbs down as I ask for ayes and nays as we go through here. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is adopted. Is there further discussion on the bill? Representative Parker.
Mr. Chair, are you ready to entertain a motion to pass this out favorably?
If the committee is done discussing, then yes.
So moved.
All right, there's a motion. Hold up. Actually, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that motion because I need you to repeat it favorably as amended.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move that we pass out favorably as amended House Bill, can you help me with the number?
2090.
Thank you, 2090.
All right, you've heard the motion. I need a second. Second from Representative Collins. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And that concludes our business for today, committee. Thank you all very much. You all have a great weekend. Committee adjourned.